Tickets. Tickets, please. Step inside, take a ride upon the Terror Train. All aboard, be fair warned, these rails house fear and pain. Find a seat, don't mind the heat, just pray the lights stay on. Upon these rails, these bloody rails, in darkness lies no dawn. Yes, step inside, come crawl or glide, with us you shall remain. Upon this ride, this hellish ride, we call the Terror Train. Ticket, please. James Ward Kirk Publications presents Terror Train, Episode 101, New York.
Welcome aboard. Welcome to my home. I am the disembodied voice, your ghost host, so to speak. Call me Welcome to my train. Be you dead, undead, or of the living. Our passengers this evening are Roger Cowin and Charie D. LaMarr. They have come aboard from the frighteningly fine city of New York. Roger, reflecting his dark ride, has brought upon the rails a poem. As Roger takes his permanent seat upon the Terror Train, we hear his voice before his final scream. His poem, Departure.
Ticket, please. Departure by Roger Cowin. All aboard! All aboard! New York to eternity and all points between. Boarding! The conductor cries, dragging his misshapen, wraith-like body up and down the platform. Black-skinned demons with leathery, reptilian wings stand guard over the frightened, reluctant passengers, keeping any strays in line with pitchforks and barbed tails. Every soul shuffled aboard serves as fuel for the night train. ticket, please. Shuffling Off to Nowhere by Charie D. LaMarr. My granny loved the funny papers. She followed them all. Dick Tracy, Joe Palooka, Flash Gordon, Lil Abner, Blondie and Dondi, the whole 9 yards. That's why, when her only daughter married a man named Kevin Starr and gave birth to a red-headed daughter, Granny pushed for the name Brenda, and won. Starr's the name, Brenda Lynn Starr. And the first person who asks me if the carpet matches the drapes is going to find out what I do twice a week in Krav Maga class. The hard way. I guess it was only natural that I gravitated toward journalism, getting my degree at Columbia. The name always gave professors a chuckle the first time they met me. I started out drifting around the Midwest, working for a string of small-town papers. My first job was as an obit writer in a town that had a very large nursing home. It kept me pretty busy trying to find new ways to say, beloved. Then I moved on to another paper where I covered human interest. Lots of garden parties, junior league activities, once in a while filling in for the social editor and covering the garden wedding scene. Fluff. My big break came in 2014 when I applied for a job at the New York Times and actually got it. I started out in the travel department, writing short pieces and fact-checking, eventually working my way up to my own byline in the Sunday travel section. It's a gig made in heaven. I spend most of my time traveling around the world for free and getting paid to write about it. The only real downsides are that I have trouble maintaining relationships, and I had to give up my cat. Sometimes I was gone so long that when I picked her up at the vet, she didn't even recognize me. But I have been everywhere, from the top of the Eiffel Tower to the Great Wall of China, and all on the Times nickel. And I love my job. On May 4th, 2019, I sat at my desk with my third latte of the day and a muffin, hurrying through the last of my email messages. On my desk was an invitation, and I was running late. You are cordially invited to the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony commemorating the completion of the first transcontinental railroad, departing from Grand Central Station, May 4th, 2019, 9 p.m., ending in San Francisco, California. Bon Voyage dinner, 6 p.m., Cipriani, 120 East 42nd Street, New York. Okay, so I don't always love my job. I hate trains. Ever since I was a kid and my grandmother picked me up every summer and took me to stay with her in Washington, I have had problems with motion sickness. Some people say it helps the ride facing forward. It never helped me. By the time we got to Union Station, I had been through 2 or 3 barf bags and was ready to spend the next 2 days in bed. I can't even stand the subway. I can barely take a bus to work. Put me on a plane with a couple of drinks and a Prozac and wake me up when we get there, and I am fine. But the mere thought of a train makes me lose my lunch. But what's a girl to do when she writes about travel for the biggest newspaper in the world? So I have suffered through the Orient Express, the Trans-Siberian Railway, the Mombasa to Nairobi Nightmare, the Palace on Wheels in India, the Glacier Express in Switzerland, Japan's Shinkansen bullet train, and the Blue Train in South Africa, and a few others I would like to forget. I have even had the occasion to take the New York to Washington Acela. You have no idea how glad I am they don't have the Chattanooga Choo-Choo anymore. Otherwise I might be barfing all the way to Tennessee, 8 to the bar. Even with the bio band, acupressure bands, Dramamine, Bonine, peppermint tea, cool compresses, a battery-operated fan, and music on headphones, I never fail to spend at least 2 visits per day paying homage to the porcelain goddess. I have seen therapists, tried biofeedback, you name it. Trains and I will never be friends. I tried to talk my way out of this one, but my editor just wouldn't hear of it. He gave me a front-page preview piece in the Sunday travel section and guaranteed me a large follow-up piece as long as I promised to leave out the parts about the projectile vomiting. He also offered me a raise and a week's paid vacation to Paris. What was a girl to do? The idea of spending a week at the Georgian Cinq and treated like a goddess was just too hard to resist. So, after answering my last email message, a note from my best friend wishing me a wretching good time, hilarious, I logged off, grabbed my rolling suitcase, finished the last of my coffee, and headed for Cipriani. In the weeks up to the trip, I had gotten several letters from former train buddies. There are a whole bunch of train aficionados who go on these special trips I take and report on. I've made many train friends. One of them even promised me he had developed the perfect cure for my train sickness, and he guaranteed me I was going to have a fabulous trip without tossing my cookies once. Even so, I planned to skip lunch at Cipriani, and that would be hard. I love Cipriani. Usually I manage to toss back a couple of glasses of red wine along with one of their amazing pasta dishes and save room for something gooey and chocolate. But this time, I'd wander around, do a few quick interviews, maybe hit the champagne just a little, and then head over to Grand Central and board the train early to meet my traveling photographer, Honorary Eddie Martin, to interview my Pullman porter for the trip. Poor guy. He had no idea what he was in for. I checked my suitcases and walked into a room that contained a lot of familiar faces. Train aficionados. No way they were going to miss this one. The first person that greeted me in Cipriani was Billy Bob Acer, a Texas oil man. Billy Bob and his wife Betty Sue do a lot of the train trips I take and report on. Billy Bob is the grandson of a hobo who rode the rails back in the 30s and worked his way up to ownership of one of the biggest oil companies in Texas. His wife, Betty Sue, has terrible motion sickness. We have spent many an afternoon taking turns in the commode. She really should stay home when he trains. I don't know whether it's because she loves him madly or she doesn't trust it. Or maybe it's a combination of both. Well, if it isn't Brenda Starr of the New York Times. Going with us tonight? Just kidding. That's why I brought along another bottle of the elixir I worked out for Betty Sue. I'm proud to say it works just fine. We trained home from Atlanta to Dallas last month, and the little woman didn't even get nauseous. Here she is now. Betty Sue, tell Brenda all about the new train juice I came up with for you. Betty Sue sauntered over holding a glass of champagne, wearing about $1 million in diamonds, and a cheap satin windbreaker with the Ace of Hearts and the Ace of Spades and a locomotive embroidered on the back. On the top of it had their names. On the bottom it said, The Two Aces. It was cute, but somehow I got the feeling that she would rather have been wearing Versace. Brenda, she yelled, and hugged me so hard that some of the champagne spilled onto my black suit. Brenda Starr travel tip number 1. Always travel in black. And always in a suit, so you can take the jacket off when you need to clean off stains. That way you arrive nice and fresh and don't enter a classy establishment looking like a bag lady who slept sitting up all the way. Betty Sue reached into her enormous Birkin bag and handed me a bottle. It looked like bootlegging gone horribly wrong. It contains ginseng, chamomile, peppermint tea, a touch of almond extract, some rare Chinese herbs, a touch of Gatorade for the electrolytes, a little blood orange juice, and a small amount of Tennessee sipping whiskey. You should take a dose now and one when the train gets moving. Then one in the morning and one at lunch. You take it with dry crackers. It works so well in Betty Sue we're thinking of patenting it. If it works, and you write about it in your column, we'll cut you in for 15% in perpetuity. We can make you a very rich lady. I smelled it. It smelled pretty vile, and I wasn't sure if those were some dead powdered insects crawling around inside it. But I was a pretty adventurous eater. You have to be a world traveler, and so I stopped the waiter, grabbed 2 crackers, scraped off the caviar, and swallowed. I followed it with a gulp of the potion. I came close to hacking right there and then. But after 5 minutes, the feeling was gone, and I was feeling pretty good. I had 2 glasses of champagne and even managed to find the pastry cart and hide in the corner with something to feed the chocolate monster in me. And then I saw him walking toward me. I checked to make sure I didn't have any chocolate on my face. He was tall, dark-haired, slightly graying at the temples, and had a blue eye the color of the water gracing many a loo into which I have made deposits while on train or bus trips. Yes, eye. The other one was covered with a black leather patch. The good one had eyelashes so long they cast a shadow over his face that made it look like we were talking through the bars on prison visiting day. Something about this guy was bad, and if there's something I love more than chocolate, it's guys who are bad. He sat opposite me and pushed the rest of my dessert away. "You don't need this. You're sweet enough," he said in a thick accent. The one that you used to say, Bond, James Bond. Okay, so the pickup line sucked, but the accent had me long about the second syllable. I teetered politely. It wasn't mine. It was here when I sat down. I moved on quickly before he could call me out on that one. "So, are you here for the big transcontinental railroad trip?" "Yes," he replied. "Quite the train buff, actually. But teaching prevents me from taking as many trips as I'd like. Of course, I've managed a few. The Orient Express, naturally. The Trans-Siberian. The Hiram Bingham to Machu Picchu. The Ghan between Alice and Darwin is one of my favorites. Have you done that one?" Actually, I had begged off of that one about a year earlier. They sent someone else. "No, I missed that one. But I've done the Blue Train, the Palace on Wheels, the Andean Explorer, and several others. Even ridden the Shinkansen bullet train in Japan. Yes, I love trains." He smiled in a scholarly way, put his chin on his hand, and leaned in. "And how is it that you have time for such adventures?" My God, he was gorgeous. I could barely get a word out. "I'm a traveler reporter for the New York Times. I cover the most glamorous trips in the world and write about them. Maybe you've seen my byline, Brenda Lynn Starr?" "Oh, yes. You were on the Antarctic cruise that became icebound a few years ago. I read your recent piece about the anniversary cruise you all took. Through the Panama Canal. Well played. Not much chance of getting frozen in down there." I chuckled. True, but I didn't breathe until the ship was safely through those locks. I was terrified about having to be rescued again. "So how is it that you're able to take so many train trips?" I asked, eyeing the dessert longingly. "I'm a professor at Cambridge. I teach literature. I use school vacations and sabbaticals to travel." "Ah, so you're an English professor." I wrinkled my nose at the bad joke. "I bet you've heard that a million times." "A few," he replied, "but never quite as enchantingly as it sounded coming from you. Actually, I'm a Scottish English professor. But I guess to Americans, we all look the same." He smiled, and the way that blue eye crinkled at the corner took my breath away. Maybe this was going to be an interesting trip after all. I stood up from the table, and he stood too. Why don't American men do that? I blamed their mothers. "Well, I have to head over to the train now. My photographer is waiting for me. He already boarded. I have an interview scheduled with my Pullman porter before things get really busy." I glanced down at the chocolate. Sorry I hadn't gotten to finish it, but not sorry for the distraction that prevented that from happening. "Well, perhaps we'll see each other during the trip. I've learned midnight supper tonight is formal. I'll look for you," I said sweetly. He took my hand and kissed it. "As I shall look for you, too." American men don't do much of that either. With that, I swept out of the room, my red ponytail bouncing behind me, hopefully making a good impression on... I realized then that he hadn't told me his name. I smiled, looked to the heavens, and spoke. "Well, Granny, it looks like your Brenda Starr just found herself a mystery man." I grabbed my wheeler from the check-in and headed across the street to Grand Central Station. Grand Central Station, or Grand Central Terminal as it is more properly called, covers 49 acres of prime New York City real estate at the corner of Park Avenue and East 42nd Street. It was scheduled for demolition a while back, but a group led by Jackie O saved it. Like she was ever actually inside of it. It was a pretty crappy place back then, but they fixed it up. Now it's just crowded, but the oyster bar is to die for. I took a deep breath and pushed on the doors. Here it came, another 3 days and 4 nights of almost non-stop barfing. Why is it I can throw up for 3 days and never lose an ounce? As I entered the building, a wave of dizziness came over me. I stopped to catch my breath. Then something hit me on the middle of the stomach. I gasped and closed my eyes tightly. It snaked around my body and disappeared into the floor. It felt like a prick and tingle, like electricity surged around me. It took a moment before I could open my eyes. When I did, I immediately noticed that there was something in front of my face, like I had walked through a large spider web. I reached up to pull it away and discovered it attached to something on my head. A hat. I wasn't wearing one when I left Cipriani. Who wears hats? I touched it. My hair. The long red ponytail was gone. It was short and curling. How was it possible? Panicking, I looked around the huge room. Everything was black and white. Bright white light streamed through the clerestory windows high on the walls, pooling onto the jet-black floor as people hurried across it. Huge, strong beams of light, like the spotlights outside a Hollywood premiere. I recognized it at once, this iconic photo of the station in the 1930s. I reached out to grab the handle of my roller and discovered I was carrying a small, hard-sided makeup case and a handbag I wouldn't be caught dead with. My travel pantsuit was replaced with a printed dress that fell beneath my knees, and I could tell I was wearing hose. The tips of them were sticking out of a pair of peep-toe platform shoes. This was not good. I ran to the newsstand, grabbed a newspaper, and read the headlines. Lou Gehrigan streak at 2,130. Union Station opens in Los Angeles, and total lunar eclipse visible in Far East. None of those things happened. I looked at the date. May 4th, 1939. How is that possible? I put the newspaper down. Somehow 3 lattes with extra shots, a couple of glasses of champagne, and a hit of Billy Bob's train juice had me hallucinating. My entire body was trembling. Maybe if I turned around, walked out of the station, and walked back in again, my head might clear up. A little fresh air might just do it. I turned around and walked straight into the mystery man, dressed in a pinstripe suit and a fedora hat. "There you are, darling. I paid the taxi driver and had the red cap take our luggage to the compartment." He reached into his vest and retrieved a pocket watch on a chain, clicking it open. "We're a little early. We don't have to board for another 3/4 of an hour. Shall we find a bookstore? I'm sure you'll want something to read on the train." Did he see it too? Or was it just me? Had his whole world just morphed into something from the Twilight Zone? If so, he wasn't mentioning it. And exactly how does one bring that subject up? Exactly who are you? What have you done with my roll-on? And why is the entire world black and white? And why is it 1939? I decided to let it go a little longer and see what happened. I don't like to jump into things too quickly. Besides, he mentioned a bookstore and took me by the hand. What was I supposed to do? We walked around until we found a shop. My feet were killing me. We walked in and I gasped. Shelves full of books like The Hobbit, Of Mice and Men, Rebecca, Tropic of Cancer, The Unvanquished, Death on the Nile, To Have and Have Not, Northwest Passage. I took a copy of Rebecca off the shelf. It was a first edition in mint condition. I was standing in the middle of a room filled with books worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. First editions by the most famous authors of the 20th century. Hemingway, Faulkner, Williams, Fitzgerald, Christie, Hammett. The list went on and on. "Holy shit," I said. "I'm sorry, darling," the mystery man said from the other side of the store. "Did you say something?" No," I said, gathering up a pile and taking them to the counter. Suddenly it occurred to me that this wasn't my handbag, and even if it was, they didn't have plastic in 1939. The mystery man came up behind me and put his arms around my waist, kissing me on the throat. "Darling, I know you're a librarian and love books, but seriously, you don't think you'll need all these reading on our honeymoon, do you?" I felt my heart stop. Honeymoon? I was married to this guy? I didn't even know his name. And when did I become a librarian? I was flying by the seat of my pants. "Oh no, I don't expect to get all of them on our trip, but I've been wanting to buy these titles. I'm sure you'll let me get to them sooner or later." What I really hoped was that when I woke up in 2019, I'd still have the books. A shelf of brand new first editions would be to die for. "Okay," he said to the salesgirl. "Wrap them up. But sweetheart, you really need to start letting me pay for things for you. I am your husband now." I took another look at the mystery man. He was hot as hell. This trip just got a lot more interesting. We boarded the New York Central and met by our Pullman porter. A dark-skinned man with wiry gray hair. He tipped his hat and greeted us. "Good evening to you, Mr. Blackwood, sir. I sure hope I was pronouncing that correct. And a good evening to you, missus. Your compartment is just down here. Walk this way." He took my bag from me, turned and shuffled down the hall, leaving us to follow. I tried not to laugh. Not even Richard Pryor would get away with an act like that in 2019. I was tempted to stoop over and shuffle behind him. "Here we goes, Mr. Blackwoods," he said, opening the door, sitting my travel case inside and handing the mystery man, Mr. Blackwoods, the key. The mystery man flipped him a shiny quarter. The Pullman porter took off his hat in time to catch it inside. "Oh, thank you, sir. And now remember, if you'd be needing anything, you just ring for Titus, sir, and I'll come running. Have a great trip." He shuffled down the hall, putting the quarter in his pocket and singing to himself. "If you got a shiny quarter, you tell the Pullman porter, turn the lights real low. Oh, 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 and we're gonna shuffle, shuffling off to Buffalo." "Come on, my love. I know this isn't our home, but I'd still like to carry you over the threshold." He dropped the parcel of books on the floor inside and swept me up into his arms. "I hope you don't mind that I had the beds made up. We have time before dinner, and I thought we could, well, you know." Yeah, I did know, and the champagne and Texas train juice was just beginning to make me mighty horny. Hey, this was 2019. At least it was when I woke up that morning, and women were liberated. I even carried my own condoms in my handbag, although I had absolutely no clue where my Chanel bag was, and that made me damn mad. I blew a whole year of bonuses and profit sharing on that purse on a trip to Paris, and now it was 80 years in the future, probably picked up by some bag lady in the station and pawned for $50. Behind me, Mr. Blackwoods, no first name yet, was fussing around in one of the trunks. He handed me something white and fluffy. "Darling, put this on for me, please. Ever since you bought this, you have no idea how I have dreamed of seeing you in it." "Oh, yes, dear," I said, picking up my handbag and taking the lingerie from him. "I think I'll just go inside and freshen up." It was a good excuse to rifle through the handbag for clues. And condoms. According to the papers inside, my name was Diana Warner. I lived in Manhattan, worked at the New York Public Library, and was 27. In an envelope, I found a marriage license. I, Diana Warner, had married Brandon Blackwoods of Cambridge, England, that very morning at City Hall. Which was kind of funny, since I'd only met him at dinner. He called out to me, "We're dressing for the midnight supper tonight. If you don't mind, I'll choose something for you, and have the Pullman porter press it. I'll be choosing your clothes a lot now. After all, I'm your husband. You did promise to love, honor, and obey." Like hell I would. I took off my dress, only to find that I was wearing a girdle. What the hell? Did I look like someone who needed a girdle? I went to Krav Maga class 2 nights a week and hit the gym another 3. Then I looked in the mirror. My 1930s body was a little bit different. I had less boobage, my waist was smaller, but my hips were decidedly wider. I wondered if I could sleep in the girdle. Sighing, I slipped into the negligee. It was white satin, low cut in the front and almost backless. The coat, trimmed in marabou, had a train that I doubted would fit in the compartment from one end to the other. I took off my silly-looking hat and started wondering what it would look like as a platinum blonde. I patted my curls and said, "Come up and see me sometime," in my best Mae West. Hey, if you're going to hallucinate, you might as well enjoy it. But when I find that snake oil-making cowboy Billy Bob, I was going to kick his sorry ass from the engine to the caboose. When I opened the bathroom door, Brandon the mystery man had changed into black silk pajamas and a velvet robe. It was well, was black and white, like everything else. I stifled a giggle. Make that a guffaw. No man I've ever been with owned a robe, except for that guy back in college who liked to do Ian Anderson impressions. You look magnificent, he said. That accent made me wet. Come and show me the gown. He was kind of too late on the coming part. The voice gave me a little O. As for the gown, I practically tripped over it. I'm not exactly a red carpet kind of girl. He swept me up into his arms and tossed me under the bed. Standing above me, he unbelted his robe and tossed it away. I slid out of mine and tossed it away too. 1939 sex was strange. All that stuff about I Love Lucy was absolutely true. Neither one of us ever took our clothes off. We did it in the dark. A novelty for me. And don't ask me how, but he managed to keep one foot on the floor at all times. He wasn't even in the same zip code as my G-spot. But he seemed to enjoy himself. If things were going to stay black and white, Diana had a lot to teach this guy. There was a knock on the door, and he shrugged on his robe to answer it. It was Titus, with her evening clothes. The hubby was going to be wearing a white dinner jacket. I could see that. He'd chosen brocade for me. It was black. I was getting somewhat sick of black. I slid out of bed, practically landing on my newly plump ass on the floor with all of that satin, took the dress, and headed back into the bathroom to change. Believe me, the girdle went on first. I was not being caught dead with hips like that. I have to admit, I looked pretty good as a 1930s vamp. I did miss the red hair, though. Exiting the tiny bathroom with a little sway of my hips, I was shocked to see him in a white dinner jacket with black tie, and with black and white plaid kilt, complete with a very hairy sporran. Amours, you pervs. I have to admit, I had another little O, better than the one he gave me in bed. I do so love a man in a kilt. I once spent an entire week in Scotland with damp panties, wondering if they really did go commando. We sashayed into the dining room, arm in arm, him in his kilt and me with a black orchid corsage and white gloves up to my shoulders with diamond cuffs on both hands. Are they diamonds? Did college professors make enough to give their wives diamonds? Anyway, we looked pretty swanky, as they used to say back in the day. They were all the same people I had just had dinner with at Cipriani, all decked out in vintage clothes and acting like there wasn't a single thing wrong with the world being black and white. Billy Bob and Betty Sue looked like a formal Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. They saw me and headed in my direction. Surely they would know that I wasn't Diana Warner. They must have known that something was terribly wrong. Billy Bob grabbed a couple of glasses of champagne and headed over to where we were standing. Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwoods. I didn't think the two of you would mix up tonight. After this morning's festivities at City Hall, we figured you'd be pretty much keeping to yourselves. Brandon chuckled. We missed the gala send-off supper. We wouldn't hear of it. This is the highlight of the trip. I was glad to hear that because our little foray in the compartment sure wasn't a highlight. We strolled around arm in arm, greeting the guests. All of them had the same names they did in 2019, and yet they all greeted me as Diana and congratulated me on my recent nuptials. Apparently the two aces had stood up for us. All news to me. Billy Bob gave Brandon the mystery man lots of nudges and pokes in the ribs, accompanied by a lot of rude remarks about sex that sounded like stuff 12-year-olds say in 2019. I rolled my eyes and hit the champagne hard. Maybe if I could get drunk enough, color would come back to the world and I would return to 2019 and to Brenda Lynn Starr. I have to admit I was pretty hammered when we left the dinner party to return to our compartment. Old Titus was waiting outside to inform Massa Blackwoods that the beds were made and turned down, and to collect another shiny quarter. He headed down the hall singing, 25 cents richer. Sex wasn't much better the second time, although the champagne made me a little bolder. Oh my, Mrs. Blackwoods, where did you learn to do that? He asked, blushing. Hey, it wasn't like I had invented being on top, had I? Well, maybe I had. And his body shuddered all over when he tossed in a little hand job, his first. Pretty wasted on the champagne. Oh, Mrs. Blackwoods, you are positively swacked, he had said. It didn't take me long to fall asleep. Surprisingly, not once did I feel the urge to toss my cookies. The rumbling of the train sounded soothing, almost like a lullaby. Even the cramped space didn't seem to bother me. As soon as I was gone, dreaming in black and white about being in Busby Berkeley's 42nd Street, I was the little understudy who stepped into the lead after she accidentally, on purpose, set a tripwire right outside the leading lady's dressing room. I was a huge success. I was just taking my final curtain call and receiving bouquets of black and white roses when there was a knock on the door. "Mr. Blackwood! Mr. Blackwood! Get dressed and come quick. Something terrible's happened. The engineer wants everyone to gather in the observation car right away. Oh, my Lord! In all my years on this here train, I ain't never seen nothing like this ever happen. Hurry, please!" It was old Titus, and he sounded very upset. I grabbed my robe and got up. Was there a fire on the train? What could have happened? I reached over to nudge the mystery man and noticed he was gone. Had I slept through Titus's first call? No, that was impossible. Even drunk, I'm a light sleeper, and I doubt he would have left the bride behind. I dug through my trunk and found a pair of white high-waisted trousers and a black short-sleeved cashmere sweater. Pure Lauren Bacall. Just the thing to wear to an emergency. As I was leaving the compartment, I bumped into Brandon. "Oh my God," I said. "Have you heard the news? We're all supposed to meet in the observation car." "Yes," he said a bit anxiously. "I was out having a smoke. I didn't want to wake you. I heard the news and came back to find you." He grabbed my hand. "Hurry, darling." When we arrived at the car, there was a large ring of people standing around a seat in the middle of the car. Brandon held my hand and pushed us through the crowd. There was a woman sitting there. Her eyes were wide open and she was staring straight ahead. It didn't take a CSI person to see that she was dead. "Anybody know who it is?" Brandon asked, taking charge. "That be Missy Ellen Parker," Titus said. "Her compartment is next to yours." "Well, who is she traveling with?" "Alone," I said. "She's a gym teacher from New Hampshire. A big fan of trains since she was a child. She frequently takes train trips, always alone. She took a vacation week. She didn't want to miss this one." "Well, how do you know that?" the passenger asked. I had to think fast. She was dead. She wasn't going to contradict my story. "She introduced herself to me at dinner." "Well, from the looks of it, someone strangled her," another passenger said. "Probably snuck up behind her and got the drop on her." I had taken about 6 train trips with Ellen Parker. She was a gym teacher who lived with a woman in Conway, New Hampshire. She was one of those kinds of gym teachers. Taught self-defense to women and was as strong as an ox. No way she would have let someone sneak up on her and strangle her without putting up one hell of a fight. And most likely would have won. "I don't think so," I said. "There's no sign of struggle. No scratches on her arms. Her clothing wasn't disheveled. If someone is trying to strangle you, you fight. Or maybe someone stabbed her, dragged her here, and set her up like she was just sitting here." Another CSI fan, or in 1939, I guess it would be Dick Tracy. "There's no blood," Brandon said. "They cleaned it up," Dick Tracy suggested. It was a linoleum floor, but still that would have been a lot of blood to clean up, and the floor looked immaculate. "He cleaned it all up, and then he threw the rags off the train." "Where'd he get the rags from?" Billy Bob asked. "Poison?" Dick Tracy wasn't going to give up. "Nobody else got sick at supper," I said. "I know," he said. "She wasn't feeling well, so she asked the Pullman porter to bring her a nightcap. It was poisoned." Titus got in a tizzy. "Mister, I've been riding on this here train for the past 35 years. Delivered me a lot of nightcaps to a lot of peoples, and not one of them ever got poisoned, and I swear to that on my sweet mammy's grave. Besides, if when I took a poison drink to her compartment, how'd I get her here? She got at least 65 pounds on me." He was right. She clocked in at a good 225, most of it muscle. Born with a whistle around her neck and sweat socks, she was probably the kind of gym teacher who wasn't afraid to bust into the boys' room when she smelled smoke and drag some poor kids down to the principal's office by their ears. She probably went up and down the shower room and opened curtains to make sure girls were really taking showers. I shuddered just thinking about it. "Okay, so maybe you didn't poison her. What do you think happened? Who killed her?" Titus walked closer to where the body was sitting and looked her up and down. "Well, she looks pretty white, even for a white woman. I'd say it was a vampire." Okay, now we had gone way beyond PC and into the grounds of some serious racism. "There's no such thing as vampires," Betty Sue said. "Oh yes there are," Titus said, the whites of his eyes doubling in size. "Back home in Louisiana we got 'em. They comes out at night and drink blood. That's why she's so white. Someone done drank her blood." "Well, then there should be 2 little holes in the side of her neck. Now take the scarf she's wearing off and see," Dick Tracy said. Why didn't he just do it himself, the big wuss? The whites of Titus's eyes got even wider. "Titus ain't touching no dead body. You all ain't got enough quarters to make me do that." "Well, could you just prick her finger and see if she's got any blood left?" Dick Tracy said. "Well, that would prove he wasn't a vampire." "Oh, holy jumpin' hell," Billy Bob said, ripping the scarf from her throat. Betty Sue and most of the women in the room screamed. There were 2 tiny holes in the side of her throat. A small amount of blood oozed out. Her head lolled to one side, and she fell over on the seat. "I told you so," Titus yelled, practically jumping out of his skin. "It's the vampires come back. Had one on the train in '09, and now he's back." "Back?" I asked. "Oh, when you came to us, you said that you'd never seen anything like this before." Not looking good for Titus. By that time, the engineer had arrived on the scene. "We had one what in '09? "I didn't, missus. I wasn't more than a boy then. Hid in the baggage car the whole time. Scared the bejesus out of me." It made sense, and I thought I had nailed him. "A vampire, sir, and now he done come back, and he took this white woman's blood." The engineer leaned over the body, the 2 holes in her throat clearly visible. "Who did this?" he asked. "Duh. Are all train engineers high on cocaine? The vampire did, and before the night is through, he may strike again." Titus's knees were knocking together. His white-gloved hands clenched below his chin. "Stop the train!" someone yelled. "We can't stop the train," the conductor said. "We're meeting the train from the west coast at Promontory Point. It's all been arranged. The president will be there, and everything's timed down to the last minute. We'll just have to put her in the meat cooler and figure something when we get there." "Oh, but aren't we leaving the scene of a crime?" Dick Tracy asked. The engineer shook his head. From the looks of her, the actual scene of the crime is about a couple 100 miles back." "Oh, no, wait. This is the scene of the crime. We're taking it with us. We'll figure it all out when we get to Utah. For now, everybody go back to your room and lock your doors. Is anyone armed?" "Me and Betty Sue been sleeping with match and pearl-handled pistols underneath the pillows since our wedding night," Billy Bob said. "But I ain't got no silver bullets." "Titus, run down to the kitchen and grab all the garlic we have. People, if you have more than 1 crucifix, would you mind sharing? You'll be safe inside your locked rooms." I looked at Brandon. No way I was going to be locked in a room with a complete stranger. A stranger who was conveniently out smoking at the time of the crime. "Hold on a minute," I said. "That means if one of us is the vampire, one of us is going to be locked in the room with him. Would it be better if we all stayed together? Safety in numbers." "Who says a vampire's a man?" Brandon asked. "They usually are," I replied. "Okay, well, maybe not in those B movies at the drive-in. Still, I vote that we all sleep in here." "That means we'd all be sleeping with a vampire," a woman cried out. "Well, so we'll take turns keeping watch," I said. "We'll have the garlic and the crucifixes and 2 pearl-handled pistols. Somewhere on this train, there has to be a hammer and something we can use to make a steak. Just make sure you put Ellen on ice and lock her up in case she turns. 1 vampire is all we can handle right now." "Well, I know Billy Bob ain't a vampire, so we're going back to our own room," Betty Sue said. "Well, my husband isn't a vampire either," another woman said. "But that's not the point." I was getting desperate. "Don't they turn into smoke or something and slide underneath your door? I read that once. Or what if they turn into bats and fly through the transom over your door? Didn't you ever read the books?" They have ways of getting in and out of locked rooms. I think that was Edgar Allan Poe. He was a monkey, not a vampire, the mystery man said. Damn literature professors. Okay, so maybe it was, but we still need to stick together. One of us is sleeping with a vampire, right? How will you be able to live with yourself if that person wakes up tomorrow sucked dry? Well, honey, all of us have been married to our spouses for a long time, and we ain't been sucked dry yet, Betty Sue said. Poor woman. She had no idea what she was missing. Well, that just leaves you two newlyweds and Bill and Frank there. And I don't know what their deal is, Billy Bob added. We know you, but we don't know much about that English professor you married. He only asked us to stand up for you last night when we arrived in New York. Scottish, I said. Huh? Well, Scottish English professor. He's not English. Well, neither was Dracula, Dick Tracy added. Just because you're not Romanian doesn't mean you can't be a vampire. I was just saying he's Scottish. I have no clue if they have Scottish vampires. In fact, I have no clue who the vampire is. Hell, until a few minutes ago, I didn't even believe in vampires. I haven't seen you people in a while. Maybe one of you became a vampire since our last train trip. You know she's right, the mystery man added. First smart thing he's said all evening. Technically, it is possible that two of you traveling together are both vampires. Oh, Lord, end of days, Titus cried out. And then there's the crew. Anybody new on this trip, Titus? A new Pullman porter. Someone new in the kitchen. A new conductor. The engineer looked pale. Actually, there are 3 new members of the crew. Right, Titus said. And come to think on it, I ain't seen a new Pullman porter since we done left New York. Something strange about him, too. He give me the heebie-jeebies when he was shaking my hand. He had them beady little eyes. Oh, Lord, I'm getting a bad case of the willies just thinking about him. Okay, it was official. I had just entered Amos and Andy meet Dracula territory. Time to bust a move. Okay, everybody, split into groups of 4. Go back to your compartments and bring back all the blankets and pillows and any religious artifacts you might have. Crucifixes, whatever you have. Titus, organize the Pullman porters and round up the crew. We need to see who is accounted for and who is missing. While you're at it, round up any hammers and mallets you can find. Have the kitchen crew bring some big knives for whittling, and wood. We need wood. And food. We meet back here in 15 minutes. Then we seal off this car and hunker down. It's almost morning. Don't vampires go to sleep in the morning? What about me? The engineer asked. I have a crew up front, and we gotta run this train. And there's a new guy up there, too. We'll kick him out, lock him in a compartment or something, and somebody get rid of this body before she becomes a vampire, too. There was a flurry of activity. 4 guys picked up poor Ellen and headed toward the kitchen car. They dropped her twice. People took off in every direction in a mad scavenger hunt. I turned around, and the mystery man was gone. Oh, shit, I had been sleeping with a vampire. I slept with my share of losers in my time, but this had to be the worst. I really had to sign up with one of those background check services, just as soon as I got back to color and civilization. Darling, there you are. Over here. Come quick. I ran to where he was standing. Another body was on the floor between the seats. Bill or Frank, if I didn't know which. I looked at the mystery man and back at the body. Somehow, during our Agatha Christie dining room chat, Bill, or Frank, had drifted away and the vampire had gotten him. I'd been with Brandon the whole time. At least I was pretty sure I was. Did that mean that the vampire had been in the car the whole time? Maybe they really did turn into mists. Hell, I didn't know anything about vampires. I didn't even live in the century. I turned around to call out to the others and realized we were all alone in the car. Just me and the vampire. I had to get the hell out of there and fast. The mystery man blocked the door closest, and the other one was way down at the other end of the car. It was fight or flight, and somehow I had the feeling that either way, I was going to come up short. Even Krav Maga wasn't going to help me now. He would probably just turn into a bat. To put it mildly, I was fucked. I turned to run, and he quickly overcame me. I hit the floor hard and felt his hot breath on my throat. I tried to struggle, but it was too late. I felt his teeth sink into me, and my lifeblood began to drain from my body. I closed my eyes, ready to die. I was dying in 1939, the year before my mother was born. I heard a scream. It was Betty Sue. I recognized the voice. I opened my eyes and I could tell it was her. The world was back in color. I was on the floor in Grand Central Station. I could see my red hair sprawled out beside me. People were crowded around me, and it hurt so bad. I looked down at my stomach and saw the dark wet spot on my black suit. Someone was pressing on it. The hands were covered with blood. "Did anybody see what happened?" someone asked. "I did," another person replied. "This lady walked through the doors with her wheeler behind her and bumped right into this guy with an eye patch. He just kept walking, right out the doors, and then she fell. By the time I realized what happened, it was too late. He blended in with the crowd. He was probably a couple of blocks away by then." "Well, why? Why would he do it?" Betty Sue asked. "Who the hell knows, lady? Welcome to New York." I heard the sirens in the distance and watched as I bled out onto the Tennessee pink marble floor. My life flashed before my eyes, like strips in the funny papers. I wasn't going to make it. Somewhere, in the recesses of my mind, I heard the gentle sound of a train and felt that motion that always made me sick. Only this time, it was luring me to sleep. I lifted my head up to look at the beautiful clock that is rumored to be made of pure opal. The clock that makes sure that thousands of people get to work on time every day. It was 7:39. 1939. I closed my eyes and let the train take me away.
Guests have taken their permanent seats from New York to time infinitum. Are you ready to join them? Perhaps another story will lure you. Choose a car, any car, for the next time we add a permanent guest as they tell their tales of horror at its best. Come, yes, join me. My name is Terror, who rides the rails eternally upon the Terror Train.
Terror Train Podcast, Episode 101, New York. Produced by Krista Clark Grabowski, David Schutz II, and Mary Genevieve Fortier. Podcast directed and arranged by David Schutz II. The conductor, your narrator, was played by David Schutz II. Terror, the disembodied voice, was played by Mary Genevieve Fortier. Terror Train Podcast opening and closing poems written by Mary Genevieve Fortier. Host segment dialogue for Terror, the disembodied voice, written by Mary Genevieve Fortier. Production music, The House of Leaves, Chase Pulse, The Hive, and The Voices by Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com. Featured works, Departure, written by Roger Cowin. Production music, Hush by Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com. Shuffling Off to Nowhere, written by Charie D. LaMarr. Production music, The Path of the Goblin King, George Street Shuffle, Long Note 4, Measured Paces, It Is Lost, Echoes of Time version 2, Decay, The Dread, and Irregular by Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com. Podcast program edited by David Schutz II. The stories and poems presented in the Terror Train podcasts are all featured in the James Ward Kirk Publishing Anthology, Terror Train, which was edited by Krista Clark-Grabowski and A. Henry Keene. Cover art by Stephen Cooney. Content copyright 2014. Terror Train, Podcast Episode 101, New York. Copyright 2014. Survived this trek? No turning back. Dare resist, just try. Step back inside, we'll be your guide. So many ways to die. Upon this ride, nowhere to hide. With us, you shall remain. Upon this ride, this hellish ride, we call the Terror.